So in this two-tier system, one of the tiers, the tier that involves the CBDC, is between the central bank and financial institutions, whereby the CBDC really only serves as a means of interbank settlement and isn't public-facing at all. And so the second tier there is the private banks, the financial institutions are issuing the money that actual people use, but all the interbank settlement is being done in a CBDC. And this is the model that's set to be followed in the United States. Because FedNow, for example, of the Federal Reserve, that was launched solely as a means of interbank settlement, really. It's not meant to interact with the public at all, and the Federal Reserve has been very open about that, so that FedNow is essentially the infrastructure for a wholesale CBDC model, not a retail CBDC model. So when you have people like Trump and Ron DeSantis say no CBDC, they mean no public-facing CBDC. They don't mean no wholesale. Second tier managed by the private banks is likely to be are things like tokenized deposits, stable coins, things of financial products of that nature. And people will be interacting with that and thinking it's a private sector thing, not necessarily something managed by the federal government or managed by the central bank. But if you are concerned about CBDCs because of the programmability and surveillance aspects, tokenized deposits and bank-issued stablecoins can do all of those things too. You can program them with smart contracts. You can use the same controls on them and surveil them. So the idea that this is any better for financial liberty or for financial privacy is completely mistaken. So you have Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan, for example, saying we should be able to seize people's private property for climate change policy related purposes. So is having Jamie Dimon surveil and program your currency better than having the Federal Reserve surveil and program your currency? I mean, I think fundamentally at the end of the day, it's really not that different. I mean, the banks are very willing collaborators with the state surveillance apparatus. Bank of America, for example, after January 6th, gave all of these private financial transactions of account holders to the Department of Justice and the FBI, investigating people who were merely there based on geolocation data in a way that was called out for being fundamentally unconstitutional. So these banks have no problem giving your data away to the federal government when they ask. So the idea that this is a better model than a CBDC, I think, is honestly a misconception. Prominent central bankers have been going on about the need to create a new financial system and a new financial governance system since at least 2019. So in 2019 at Jackson Hole, Mark Carney, who I believe then was head of the Bank of England, but he's former Goldman Sachs, was very vocal about the need to create this new financial system. And he said this new financial system that needs to be made needs to be based mainly on three things: what he called multipolar currencies, CBDCs, and global carbon markets. That this needed to be where the future financial governance system, the pillars on which it's built, essentially. And a few years later, Mark Carney creates this Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero under the auspices of the UN that is partnered with people like BlackRock's Larry Fink, the billionaire Mike Bloomberg, for example. And they openly promote the idea of seizing the new Bretton Woods moment in order to create a new global financial governance system. The crux of their plan hinges on leveraging the multilateral development banking system. So that's the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It's the World Bank. It's any of these other MDBs, which include like the Inter-American Development Bank, all these development banks around the world that are part of this existing financial governance system. And those banks have been criticized for a long time for using the debt slavery model, essentially, basically giving loans to countries, saddling them with debt, and then they struggle to repay their debt, and the way they're able to get new disbursements or pay back their debt is related to them enacting policy objectives, often austerity. One thing people don't realize about the digital ID thing too is that there's a push not just to have people have digital ID, but literally everything alive have a digital ID. So Larry Fink talked about this when he recently talked about how he views the tokenization of real world assets moving forward. Everything's going to be on this universal ledger and have its unique identifier. He recently was very overt about how there's going to be a universal ledger where all transactions are tracked, essentially, and that this is key to this new financial system that's being created that involves digital IDs. It also involves global carbon markets, and the CBDC digital currency model. All of that is going to be on this centralized database. That's what Fink is saying. And a lot of this new system is tied up with the push for global carbon markets, whereby natural assets, which is a new asset class they're creating, are also going to have these unique identifiers. So for example, there's a lot of efforts right now, for example, to tokenize rainforests for the purpose of using it in this global carbon market. So that rainforest will also be given a unique identifier, a digital ID. So the Rockefeller Foundation and the Inter-American Development Bank, which is part of the multilateral development banking system that includes like the World Bank and the IMF, for example, partnered to create this entity called the Intrinsic Exchange Group, which then partnered with the New York Stock Exchange to launch this new asset class, basically built around what they refer to as natural assets, and create this vehicle for them called Natural Asset Corporations, or NACs. And basically the Intrinsic Exchange Group defined a natural asset as things like ecosystem services that produce clean air, water, that, like how trees produce, turn carbon dioxide into oxygen. All of those services and the parts of the natural world that facilitate those services can be monetized and turned into this new asset class, which they refer to as nature's economy. Essentially, how natural asset corporations work is that they identify the asset that they want to build the natural asset corporation around, and then the natural asset corporation issues shares in that asset out of thin air, essentially. And they can sell it to financial institutions, asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, and then they go public and have an IPO and generate finance that way, and generate funding that way, and that funding is, they say, meant to preserve the natural asset, but elsewhere they say that their main profit, like so much else, is to generate profit for shareholders. This is like the new Wall Street casino they want to make. It has nothing to do with preserving the environment. That is literally just the talking point they think will stick and sell. We're all in it together. We got to save the planet. So let's allow the bankers to create a new racket that makes the natural world collateral. I mean, that's essentially what's going on here. And so part of the infrastructure of this is to surveil the natural world to ensure that nothing happens to the natural asset. No one is accessing or using these forests, lakes, or rivers that aren't authorized to do so, whether it's by a natural asset corporation or some other financial entity that claims to manage that resource on behalf of the carbon markets. Currently, onboarding to all these systems is slow and very sporadic, and not many people are adopting it. So there needs to be some sort of event that triggers, onboarding at scale. And I think that's what we have to worry about.